everyone. Today we have our another new episode and we will discuss on 731 episode. And our topic is energy security. We have our world famous speaker, Mr. Eric and Professor David Smith. First, I would like to give chance Mr. Eric.
Okay, can you hear me? Can you guys hear me? Can you guys hear me? Okay, good. All right. So, there's two ways to look at energy security. First is, how do we maintain continued energy availability? And the other thing is, how do we secure the energy systems that we have? Because we've seen attacks on our energy grid, our power grid, and we've seen disruptions in energy supply. So I guess one of the challenges in energy security is this idea of it's very tough to produce energy locally. You don't just go get the forest and the coal locally. So especially as we move to things like batteries, where do battery materials come from? So the technologies, the materials, the industrial capacity comes from lots of places. So when you talk about securing a source of energy for a population or populations, many countries rely heavily on energy imports. Some places like Singapore have to. So that makes it vulnerable to supply disruptions, and also the markets. Markets can be manipulated or driven. Look what happens when somebody starts a war in Ukraine. There's market volatility, which is tough on getting energy dependence. So a lot of work is being done for example, batteries. How do you make batteries out of more common materials that still last? Because that becomes an energy problem. The other thing that provides some challenges, just the climate change and environmental impacts, storms, floods, changes in temperature. So balancing, things like hydroelectric become important. Another part of energy security is the fact that so much more of the world wants more energy. The world is becoming more connected, and the thing that connects a lot of us technology-wise is the energy itself. So that's a key thing, is how do you get growing need for energy distributed in more places? The other thing I started to talk about is infrastructure security becomes tough because we have pipelines and energy grids. People can attack the infrastructure, and that's not something we're used to protecting. I know for nuclear power plants, at least in the US, we've got a lot of testing, and how do you know whether they're secure or not? And they actually test that. Can they, like somebody asked once, how would you know if a plane crashed in a nuclear power plant? What happens? Well, they crash things and test it. But we don't do that for the electric power grid in general, and we don't do that for pipelines. So there's an infrastructure vulnerability. Also, there's a competition for resources right now, especially for some of the stuff that are making our current level of batteries. And there are political factors where people try and go in and influence elections and decision making on who decides what happens to a country's resources. Just look at the demand Tesla has for materials just for their production capability, and China has that same capability. And the other thing I think worth mentioning for energy security is this idea of how do we transition to more beneficial and reliable sources. Our last administration said we need to focus on coal, keeping coal alive. And what that means is that there's this reluctance to change. So even if we had the solution today and we came down, we got, oh, here it is. There's a lot of people that have a lot of investment in things as they are. And so one of the battles for energy security is people saying, I don't care if it's secure, I make money, let's keep doing it this way. And people don't want to change. If you look at Tesla went from Tesla Motor Company to Tesla with the idea of not just getting people to drive electric cars, but accelerating the transition to zero emission, clean energy sources. And there's a lot of other initiatives to go for clean energy sources, but there's just as many reasons to stay how we are and avoid that. So I think those are some key points I have on energy security. But as usual, I'm excited to hear what David has to say.
Eric, thank you so much for the kind words there. You hit many of the main points on energy security, but one of the things I think that's really important as we talk about energy security is that it really is a complex terms that has applicability in such a wide range of spheres, from political, economic, environmental, societal, technical, and others. And it's also to me difficult to describe energy security as you were beginning to do.
Yeah, and don't forget legal.
Yeah, no, because it really is a concept rather than an abstract idea, more than a policy or term. And it's differed by institutions, by different countries, by different perspectives. And, part of it really is how you're trying to use it. Where are you in the different points and how the world has changed as we're using it. And, I kind of like looking at energy security as the interrupted process is carrying the amount of energy that is necessary to sustain people's lives and daily activities while assuring it's affordable. And that's what the International Energy Agency has on it. And, as I look at it, I agree with everything that was said by Eric. But the other thing I would like to add to what Eric said is that energy security has both a long-term aspect to it and a short-term aspect to it. And, some of it depends on investments with energy supply and how it connects to economic development, economic needs, and how it works more on the society side. The other side, though, tackles how the energy system is able to carry out prompt responses to sudden changes in energy supply, demand, attacks, and attacks against the energy infrastructure are happening every day. And it's not if an attack on it's happening, it's happening every day. And it's when you are impacted. And energy security can depend on the country's needs too, such as the location, how much natural resources they have, what's the economic status, what are the import and export activities on energies and its vulnerabilities to energy supply disruptions. We have seen not only in the Ukraine, but we've seen across all of EU that this is a big one because the vulnerability of energy supply disruptions is extremely high. You see the political systems on it. You see international relationships there. You see how other parts of the world have responded, for example, to the war in Ukraine with being able to send other sources of energy into EU to kind of hold it off and see. And it's what's there. But, Eric did such a good job of putting the buckets around the energy. But apart to that, the energy security also contributes to the countries in the region's economic growth. We can't run our digital systems without energy. We can't run factories. We cannot do many things. Even agriculture today, in most places, depends heavily on energy. You look at the political stability uh, and look at how energy security really affects all of the other sectors around it. And if you go back and look at in your part of the world, Sharif, the Association of Southeast Nations defines energy security as one of its four pillars, along with energy accessibility, affordability, and sustainability. It's very important. As we look at it, and it really is how we put these places in together. How can we work to make sure that this contributes to what we're doing? And we know that regions are thrown in chaos without it. We had an ice storm uh, this last week in Austin, and we had over 250,000 people out of power, and we had over 150,000 people out without power for 4 or 5 days. And it's horribly disruptive. You saw things totally stop in those areas, and it was cold here. You saw people beginning to struggle even with how to heat houses, how to cook. The roads were too icy to drive on. So it was going back, how do we survive without electricity? And, events like that really make you understand how dependent we are on our energy security. So, Sharif, I think that gets me back to it. And I'll love to see Eric's answer this one for a little bit.
Thank you. Mr. Eric.
Well, I'm a huge fan of decentralization. That to me is the biggest answer to a lot of this. And decentralization means you see how much local capacity you can put in. Like, just take a neighborhood. The one challenge of our energy grid, our electrical power grid, is that it has the ideas you are going to be very efficient in having these big production stations that run all the time to meet the current demand. And then you have additional stations that you can bring online if the energy increases above the expected demand. They're more expensive. And when you first turn them on, you lose money until the demand keeps up to pays for itself. But by law, the energy company has to turn on these additional power sources. But it's designed to be, from the load to the source. Here comes source to load. In other words, here's this energy generation. It flows one way through the pipe. Here's what you got. And so what happens with that is people say, well, I'm going to have my own solar energy. And so I'm not going to use yours all the time. I use less, but that's good. But then they say, well, I have this energy production capability, maybe solar, and I'm gone for the week, so I'm not going to be use it. On the other hand, David is having tons of events at his house, and he's going to need more energy than he can produce. Why can't I share mine with him? Well, the grid, that's a microgrid, and the grid doesn't like that very much. It doesn't like pushing energy in when it's supposed to just be providing energy. So just the idea of microgrids and the fact that we can share energy is a big thing. But, the power company doesn't like that. I know the power company in our area is trying to say, well, we want to charge you more just for hooking up because we don't like that you're not paying us all you can. So, let's charge you more just to hook up. And by the way, if you put energy into the grid, we want to pay you less too. So I think microgrids has a lot to do with that, efficiencies. And then that also means storage of energy is I think a big thing. Is how do we store energy in various forms when energy is plentiful? And if you can do that and set up that grid, then you can get really smart. I helped start an Internet of Things company, and you just got huge efficiencies just by turning things off and preventing things from starting at the same time. So you get huge loads, and there is a whole. We went into a hotel resort and were able to save almost 50% energy just from some few things, and that's not trying very hard. So I think if we are able to build grids in that talk to each other, have multiple redundancies of backups, we have microgrids, we can share energy more efficiently. I think that has a lot to do. But again, there's a lot of resistance to saying, why don't we become more locally? If you have a bunch of localities that are more energy efficient, then they're less vulnerable to power disruptions for energy. But we still have to worry about the other resources, like our water is very vulnerable too. So that's something to think about. But I guess that would be the one thing when David was talking about that I thought of when he talked about political, legal, social, cultural, all those issues. A lot of those issues become filtered down if we can be more energy sufficient at a local level and build in the microgrids where we can share our energy, because of the power grids there. But if there's a disruption, we can more efficiently make it up, because I think there's enough energy around if we were get efficient and have more sources. The question is, David just talked about, storms in Texas. If it takes out the Texas, power grid, Texas has a lot of neighbors. And if people are more efficient within Texas, we should be able to set up that energy more efficiently and move it around. So I think smart technology, and but you have to have the infrastructure. You can't manage an internet if you don't have one. You can't manage a flexible power grid if you don't have one that's smart.
Eric, you're so right on that too. It's very interesting though, even though the power outage here was long enough that it actually began to take down cell towers where they ran out of battery and ran out of gasoline for their generators. And some of the stuff could not get out there to interact with that. But let me just take what Eric talked about and go down one more peel off the banana on it, so to speak. If you look at the global energy supply system, it is very, very unevenly distributed. And it's in fact impacted by many different things. And these include the physical factors. And, you see some of them where there's a lot of rivers flowing through where hydro electric is very important. You see others with a lot of fossil fuels. You see other ones with high winds where windmills can work. You see others where solar can be in addition to it. But even with most of those, storage becomes a real challenge. And you see, what are the costs? And when I travel and look, I see energy costs being very different all around not just the world, but even the country. When I look at the energy prices in California versus what I pay here in Texas versus when I'm in DC with my corporate apartment up there, they're so very, very different. And then you see what's the cost to extract it, how they can be used. And you're seeing increasing now big raises in the price of energy as global shortages and the geopolitical falls in. I love seeing some of the new technology advancements. We're now seeing where we're increasingly using things like wave power. We know the nuclear option has been there, but with the announcements of the fusion reactors and with the possibility of having many fusion reactors and actually many radioisotope reactors within the next year we'll bring it. But also the political factors with the social political issues, with the conflicts we see in making it. But there's also energy insecurity as well. You see the economic impacts, and particularly on low income housing and everything. But we can begin to work those there. But Eric, let me have it back to you for right now.
Well, you mentioned the nuclear issue, and that's kind of interesting in itself because we are pretty much surviving, at least in the United States, on very old technology. I mean, the technology for nuclear has come way up from what it was, yet the reactors that we have are still running very old technology. Because we're scared of it, we're uncertain of it. Energy companies don't want to invest a lot of money, although there is some investment going on. But when it comes to fail safe, fail protected, more things to do with waste, I think that is an interesting idea. And I think it's really important that we take a holistic view of energy. We don't put our eggs in one basket and say, oh, it's all going to be hydrogen. Although hydrogen is interesting because it seems to be moving pretty uniformly, slowly and uniformly across lots of countries, unlike these other technologies where some places wind is going crazy, other places electric vehicles are going crazy, and other places they're like desert. So the issue of energy, and I think the biggest challenge in energy security is energy policy. Right now, we do not have a good energy policy in many places of the world. It just kind of, here's some stuff, let's get energy as we use it. We're not really thinking very strongly about infrastructure and transportation, although we're making lots of roads into transportation, good roads. The other thing to talk about is what people will do for energy and security. You take China's Belt and Road Initiative. You know, the U.S. kind of always worked to dominate by saying, we will provide you from security. We can protect you. And then, you know, somebody launches a balloon over space and says, see, that's proof you can't be protected, but economically, look what we can do. So, you know, China is building this structured strategy which says we are going to give you energy and internet and all those wonderful economic things, which is interesting, but then who controls your energy? So for somebody that doesn't have it or it's too expensive, that might be a good idea, but then does that increase your energy security if you're dependent on someone else, anybody, China, the US, Russian pipelines? Does that help anyone to do that? So, you know, energy becomes a bargaining chip in political discussions, and even in now political economic strategies. So I think the more that we can find localized, distributed, decentralized organizations that can deal with each other. I mean, why can't New York and Washington D.C. have independent grids that share with each other? I mean, I think there's a long way we go. We're actually starting to do this in buildings. I know several buildings that run DC microgrids today, and every apartment in the building is an energy producer, and it all shares and distributes energy, and it does it efficiently. And if somebody's gone and they're not using that energy, well, their apartment is still collecting it and it's shared with the building. So that model could be used to not just that building, but how about the block? And if not the block, then if the block, then why not the whole neighborhood? If not neighborhood, why not the whole city? So I think technology is one driver. I think policy and politics are another driver, and I think economics are another driver. And speaking of driving, I think I'm on my third electric car, and I really enjoy not going to the gas station with that. Now going to the gas station seems like that's 5 minutes out of my life. That used to just be, oh, that's 5 minutes out of my life. But now it's seems like a long 5 minutes to put gas in my car, and then you look at the pump when it's coming in. So again, that's an example of economic forces that are at play. But I think there's some exciting new technologies. I think storage and I think batteries are going to be a big player. How can we make them cheap with more materials that don't require rare materials?
Dr. Talib Rafal, what we want to discuss for today's session? We are discussing on energy security.
Okay. I'd rather listen to some people and then I'll talk, if you don't mind. Okay. I'd rather listen to some people, then I'll talk.
Sharif, you want me to go back and continue then?
I didn't get the link, Sharif. I'm calling you from my mobile phone. It's going to run out of batteries.
Dr. Talib, I already sent you email 3 times.
It's not working. It's not working.
I send you again.
No, please.
Yes. Professor David Smith, what you want to add for today's session?
I had started talking a little bit on what the insecurities were. Let me go ahead and continue on with where Eric mentioned with some of it. And part of it is the economic insecurities there that we have to do, and the physical energy and the behavioral energy are there. And we need to begin to look at how to do those. And we need to work through those. So what is the availability and how it's there? And there's an ever increasing demand for energy that's disproportional to the amount of energy we have. What is the accessibility? There's economic and geopolitical factors along with technology advancement that serve as barriers to energy supply becoming accessible. Uneven distribution of all the natural resources like we talked about before, locations of undiscovered resources. Really, there's a huge worker shortage right now. And there's a lot of more ways to do production of non-conventional energy too. And what is the accessibility? As we talked about earlier, the accessibility varies dramatically around the world. And policymakers worldwide need to look at how to do this in light of the targets that are in COP 27, the other local ways of environmental regulations, and affordability is one that we have to work. Also, if we look at countries, and particularly developing nations, they need to begin to look at what is the risk they have in their energy. I can tell you, like when I'm in Haiti doing some work down there with helping them advance their energy stability, time electricity is not available during the day. And what are the risks is really high down there. And how can they, as a country and regions and companies there, begin to manage their risk? And increasingly around the world, we're looking at how do we diversify our energy resources. You know, what's fun here in Texas is we have such a wide range. We have some wave, we have natural gas, we have oil, we have nuclear, we have wind, we have solar, we have geothermal, uh, and we have all of these that add to our energy diversification. And that's kind of where we're headed with that. So I think that gives enough to help Dr. Talib see where at least I've been heading.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank
Dr.
you.
Talib, I already
Thank you.
sent you email.
Yeah. Okay, it's not working.
Check and you can
Sharif,
share.
it might cut off anytime now. Okay, I'm sorry. It's not working on my iPad. I'm using my phone. Some reason it's not connecting me. I don't know what's this. Okay, on energy thing, I want to talk from the developing country perspective. I think what David said, is very, very important here. In developing countries, you don't have energy secure at all. Actually, energy is a problem, it's a big problem. Because for some countries where there is conflict, like Syria, for example, up north of us, there is no energy. Lebanon has no energy also. I don't know why, but the reasons are very clear to me. The reasons are that the developed countries of the world have controlled our destinies in such ways that you cannot have energy in your own country. Now, that's what I want to say for that.
Thank you, Mr. Eric.
So I like what David was talking with about Texas and diversification. So that makes Texas a great place with some wind, solar, wave. So the question is, how do we connect it and store it? It's great to be diversified, but the real power comes from how can we connect it and store it? And the real key of storage is not just demand, like when the energy is plentiful and you can get it, but it's also about cost. If we want to reduce costs, for example, Ukraine impacted oil supply, so prices went up. So the president released some of our strategic oil reserve. Well, what was the real key for me for the strategic oil reserve? Well, it was one thing that oil was available, but what was really important to me was the oil that was available was oil that was acquired at a very low cost. So when you put that oil back in the system, it sold at lower prices than, lowered prices, but it still made more money than when it was stored. So, it's nice that I can collect energy during the day and use it at night. But the other key is if I can use that energy that was collected at a low cost, then not only do I get it when I need it, so you don't run out of energy, you actually get it at a lower cost. So if we can find ways to bank energy and then use it more efficiently when we have it, so we're reducing the demand, maybe not the demand, because whenever we have more energy, we figure out ways to use it. But, when it comes to emergencies, we can use energy more efficiently when it's at risk. But I think if we can reduce the cost of energy through efficient collection, lower cost of infrastructure, and the ability to trade energy with other people who collect it at a lower cost, I think really brings the possibility in developing countries of creating energy collection at low cost, energy storage, and the energy market is very difficult because, if I want to buy barrels of oil from David, it could, yeah, it could be a long time and a big negotiation. If the grid was smart, it could automatically go out and run the market saying who's offering at the lower price that's available to you. And that would change the market a lot if energy was more available, not only to buy, but to be delivered and to be traded so that we could see what energy is. And what's nice if we have some common infrastructure, then all those different sources that David talked about could be part of it. I don't care if it came from wind. I don't care if it came from solar. Be nice to use less oil, but if all those are part of the equation, I think that is something is how do you make it affordable for more people?
Thank you. Dr. Talib Rafael.
Hello, you hear me?
Yes.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. What was the question? Okay.
We are discussing on the energy security, and you are discussing some point from Middle East. So what do you think, that energy security is possible?
I don't think it's possible now. I think that the countries of the Middle East, like developing countries, are not having their own destiny in their own hands. So they cannot secure their energy. It's a big problem. Lebanon is a big problem. Syria is a big problem. We are not producers of energy, not producers of gas and oil. But even if we were, the political system does not allow us to produce any energy. Unfortunately, it's a fact. Okay.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Professor David Smith, what you want to add? Like, do you have new innovation, new solutions, new thing for the market?
Dr. Sharif, you're right where a lot of this is going. There's a lot of new advances where we're looking at things like biomass, where we're looking at the ability to generate energy from biomass, where we take, for example, animal waste, crop waste, uh, waste from cities, and we're combining those to turn them into multiple sources. Power is one of them, fertilizers and others. And I'm very excited by seeing these biomass uh, being established globally and seeing how that is done. One of the things we're doing in Haiti is establishing a biomass factory there. In parts of Africa, we're seeing biomass going in. Dr. Talib, even in your part of the world, throughout the whole area there, we're seeing biomass plants being established, be able to use and convert a lot of the waste that we see from the different activities, like I said, even petroleum waste and others being used in plants to convert it to multiple uses. So biomass is one of those future technologies. Uh, Sharif, you ran a session a couple of months ago on the announcements around fusion power. Fusion power has always been 15 years in the future. I now see that 15 years being 10 years in the future. But the advances in fusion power and fusion energy have been tremendous. Um, there were announcements in the last few weeks about the successful demonstration of mini reactors of different types. And, Eric brought up the concept of microgrids and mini grids. That concept needs to become more and more universal around the world, because I believe that's the key to one of the keys to us managing these because in the microgrids we can more easily exploit the renewable energy sources we have. Another source of energy that I love right now is I've seen demonstrations from two different companies of kinetic generation of energy. Um, there's this one company in Florida, for example, that has begun to demonstrate using kinetic energy from trains going across the country to generate energy and connect that to the grid. They've taken and converted train cars into large energy storage devices using a combination of different storage technologies, and they've attached to the wheel small inductive power generators that do not impact the performance of the train, so that when you have trains going between cities, the concept is you're charging these batteries while it's moving. You roll into the city, unhook that battery storage car, hook another one up, and keep on going. And kinetic energy on that's non-polluting, non-depleting, is to me a very interesting source of power.
But how does the train move,
Oh,
David?
the
How does
train
the train
moves
move?
as normal. Dr. Lee, the train moves as normal. So
Yeah.
this does not decrease the efficiency of the train, but it gives you power that it generates during its normal course of operation.
Okay.
And this one's really designed to go into the energy grid. Um, I think you're going to see more and more electric trains and things happening as well. But the other concept with trains that's interesting is there's another startup that is proposing putting solar cells on top of train cars and using it to charge batteries as the train moves too. So there's a lot of, as you asked Dr. Sharif, a lot of new technologies, new developments beginning to look at it. One of the other ones that is exciting to me, and this is an Israeli company that pioneered the air to water concept and being able to just from the air extract water. They are also now doing air to energy. They're looking at ways to use chemical conversions of particularly using the hydrogen that is in the oxygen and converting that to energy. And hydrogen is a very
It's not like the windmill, right?
interesting energy source. The problem with hydrogen, and that's what you see in fuel cells, is hydrogen by itself is uh, unstable. It's a very small atom, very active. But hydrogen power, and I believe hydrogen cars are going to be one of the big things in our future. The next generation after electric vehicles, I believe, will be hydrogen vehicles because of that. But there's a challenge of getting there, just engineering today. The other place, Dr. Sharif, is that we haven't talked about on this is the place that has been lagging the most in energy security is not the energy. It's partially the storage, as Eric said, but it's also the systems to manage it. Most of our energy grids are built with computer technology from the 80s. They're not fully censored. We have such good sensors now. We have advanced systems that we need to begin to upgrade the digital systems that are the command control of our energy systems dramatically, and that will really change the future.
Mr. Eric.
So since we're on the road, I think overcoming politics is probably our biggest challenge, and there's some ways to do that. But as long as we're talking about advancements, one of the ones that always intrigued me was solar roadways. The idea of why not build these roads, which are everywhere and we're always upgrading. They're big spots. They drive through places that get lots of energy, at least somewhere. Almost always there's some place that can generate energy. And, that seems like, I remember they had one of those solar roadways demonstrated in California. And what was interesting about it is not only was it generating and storing solar, but it could even light up the roads when you needed a light, and it could even heat up the roads when you need to melt ice. So solar roadways have always been something that kind of intrigued me. The other part, I think, Dave was talking about, we got like the piezoelectric generation, where mechanical motion and rumbling causes chips to give off electrical energy. I know the government has several things, even from the vibration of airplanes flying, because you can't stop them from vibrating completely. That becomes a source of energy. Also, there's a lot of energy that can be achieved through differential temperatures, when things are different, when water is different. So this, thermal electric idea has some interest. We already talked about wind energy and solar and biomass. And I think the kinetic energy recovery. I remember one place putting a big flywheel in the basement that just speeds up and spins for a long time. Of course, people don't realize how dangerous a huge, massive spinning flywheel can be. So you have to be very careful. And then the fission reactors, a lot of stuff going there. And then, of course, the fusion reactors. And when I was out in Hawaii working, I know that the Air Force was running hydrogen cars. And the reason they did that is they could build a fueling station just in a shipping container and ship that places. And then they would generate hydrogen fuel anywhere. That was their major interest in that. So I think technology has a lot of promise. I think politics, though, is probably one of the biggest factors.
Thank you. Dr. Talib Rafal.
I agree with what Eric said at the end. Politics is the real factor. Energy is not a problem of technology. Technology is there. You could generate energy from our solar systems, from our water systems, from our fusion systems, from our movement systems. We can do that. But the politics are very, very crucial here, because the politics are hindering us from getting the energy that we need. And this is going to infect us in the future very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor David Smith.
Geopolitics are always important because it's going to affect us on all the bases. But Dr. Cleve, I would actually love to add, it's not just the politics, it's the geopolitics of it too. Because the interactions between the nations and the cooperatives, but also it's the interactions of the large non-government organizations too. So we see OPEC having a role in that. We see the Atomic Energy Commission having roles in that. We see so many different non-governmental organizations in it. You see the United Nations is leading all the COP discussions as a non-government organization. So the politics and the geopolitics are very important in that. In fact, Dr. Sharif, if you look at the people who are really advocating for all the different pieces of energy security, the NGOs are actually have the largest voice in the table of advocating for their own particular type of energy, their own approach to energy, their own views of what is sustainable energy, what is environmental friendly energy, and all of that. So it really has to go beyond just classic politics as you look at the future of energy security. I'm going to go back to something, Dr. Sharif, you hear me say way too many times, is energy is a system of systems and have to be treated as a system of systems. I can't just look at oil production by itself. I cannot just look at hydro uh, hydroelectric production by itself. I cannot look just at how it is generated. I need to look how it's stored. I have to look at how it's transmitted. You know, there was a concept of using high temperature superconductive transmission lines that were really popular a number of years ago. And that has gone by the wayside. But how can we transmit it more efficiently? This concept that we're seeing now of mini and microgrids. I love the concept. I think it's a very vitally important, but it has limited acceptance around the world. And I believe we need to see its acceptance go up. You heard me mention, what are the control systems? What are the regulatory systems that are involved with this? Is there a way that we can look at energy as a shared resource as opposed to a resource that each individual piece of it has its own collectors taking the toll as you go down the toll road through each of the parts of that of the energy systems and being able to do it. So it really is a complex system that there's a lot of room still for innovation, which is what I really like today. If you had asked me the room for innovation 50 years ago, my answer would have been different because the incumbents were so strong. But with all the disruptors we have now, with the fact that we can now see a global marketplace, the ability to innovate is at an all-time high in this area. And as we see the pain going in, I can tell you what made my week better last week is when we had the event in Texas several years ago, the once in a century snowstorm. I went out and bought a propane gas generator. And I tell you, the few hours I was without electricity, I fired that up and not only had lights, but I even had 220 hook into my grid, into my household, and was able to run some things in the house like the refrigerators and other things that those without something like that did not. So even yourself, an average consumer who can look at energy security, we live in a new time. The fact that I could go and buy that several years ago, hook a propane tank up to it, hit the battery, and it started, and I had power. Uh, so we each have to look at how it impacts us individually. And on one hand, I felt really like a prepper by having that generator out of my storage shed. But on the other hand, it sure felt nice to be able to turn that heater on and to warm up some food and things too. So energy security means a lot of things, and that systems of systems approach, I believe, is vitally important for us to consider with it, Sharif. And Dr. Sharif, I have a 11 o'clock Zoom call I have to get into. So I think that will probably be my concluding remarks today, Sharif.
Thank you. Mr. Eric, what's your concluding remarks for today's session?
Well, first of all, I'm happy to say that my house lives off propane and electricity and various forms of heating and cooking and things like that. So I've got, hot water regardless, for example. But I think that the real key is in storage and distribution. I think if we have common storage and distribution, that smart system, it doesn't matter how many different pieces are contributing to that, whether it comes from solar or gas or propane or whatever. I think that is the key. I guess the one complaint I have is I've been paying for energy for many, many decades, and I want to know why I wasn't offered the opportunity to own part of that grid with my payments. Why couldn't I pay a little extra all these years and own more of it? Maybe by now I wouldn't be paying for that at all. And I don't think the government's going to make that happen, but I think with more people building network states there's nothing that says we can't have stakeholders come in and control that in a decentralized manner, using a lot of the lessons from blockchain and things like that. We're not talking cryptocurrency. We're talking about how do you put things in ownership? How do you come up with common rules on how this thing operates economically and operationally, and it can run? If we can build that together, then I think with the ability to plug in these other systems, and the innovation in those systems can continue to go on, as will the innovation for the construction and control of the distribution and storage. But I think distribution and storage is the key to becoming secure in our energy, because all the other stuff, like we've talked about, is happening anyway.
Thank you. Dr. Talib, what's your concluding remarks?
Okay, I think what we heard so far is technology based, because all of the innovations that are being discussed now are technology based. Who is going to produce these networks? How are they going to store them? Who's going to build the storage for them? How are these cellular panels going to be erected? I did put my cellular panels in my home in Jordan now, but I had to pay the electrical company, which is owned by government, so a certain amount of money to be able to use this electrical grid. So I think what we need to discuss here is, why is technology not being transmitted the right way to the developing countries? That's the question. We cannot do like what David and Eric are just saying in our homes. We cannot do that. We're not allowed to do that. And I think that's a major problem here. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you everyone for joining today's session. Energy is a really, really critical problem right now. So everybody has to involve with a lot of innovations. Especially, I request all of the emerging technology youth community, you can engage with innovation activities of the World Talent Economy Forum with our business incubations, and you can get the result. Uh, and by this way, you can solve energy problem or energy security issues of your country. Thank you, Mr. Eric, Mr. David Smith, and Professor Dr. Talib Rafael for your continuous
Thank
support
you.
for World Talent Economy Forum. Beside
Thank you.
that, I just want to share with good news. World Talent Economy Forum will collaborate with the Prime Minister Office, BEZA, Bangladesh Economic Zone, and we will solve the real life problem with real solutions. Thank you. Bye-bye and take care.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.